listening to Pause. We pause for a second or two. This is episode 199. Swedish soldiers deployed. For the longest time, over 200 years, Sweden has been a country officially neutral in major wars. Few, if any, other country has had such a blessed and peaceful geopolitical position as Sweden has had for the last 100 or 200 years. For a Swede, when we go to school as kids, we read about the Great Wars. We read about immense losses, about the atrocities, about the traumas, about the more difficult sides to human nature, or human group nature, we might say. But as a Swede, as a kid, a Swedish kid, when we read about the major wars, inevitably, it all has this sort of fictitious feel to it. Few Swedish parents, few Swedish grandparents, almost none, have actually experienced war close up. Today's episode is called Swedish Soldiers Deployed. And today we talk about, yes, in part about this piece of news, that Swedish soldiers now are deployed abroad in Latvia, in historically, for the first time in a couple of 100 years, taking sides, picking one side over the other in an international conflict. In part, we are talking about this piece of news and what that means for Sweden. We also talk about what this piece of news is an example of. In this time, we see many examples of similar events occurring, and we will get to that. So first about what this piece of news means for Sweden. So basically, as we talked about in our introduction, if you're a Swede and you go to school, you are taught that Swedes are a peace-loving people. My generation, I was born in 90. My generation was taught that Swedes are a peace-loving people. And my parents' generation were taught the same. And my grandparents the same. We are a peace-loving people. Okay, so basically every other country, once in a while, are in war. But not our country, we learned. Okay, so that's how it is. And then, as Swedish kids grow a bit older, some way or another, they find out that Sweden produces weapons, military weapons. And we also produce military boats and fighter jets, among other military equipment. And then for a Swede, you have these two truths, okay? We are a peace-loving people, but we also at the same time make money from producing military devices and military weapons. Okay. So then the image becomes more complex for the general Swede. And then 4 years ago, when the Russia-Ukraine conflict escalated, then very quickly, it went in a matter of weeks, just a couple of weeks. Swedes almost unanimously, not quite, but many Swedes, let's say that, a majority of Swedes, thought it was clear as day that now we should no longer be neutral. Yes, we have been neutral for 200 years, and yes, we have been taught in school that we are a peace-loving people. Yes. But now, very suddenly, in a very short span of time, a majority of Swedish people changed their minds. Now we should change that. And we did, and entered NATO. And now, today, this day, 4 years later, 550 Swedish soldiers were deployed to Latvia. Deployed abroad, taking sides in a potential war, if it would come to that. If you are a listener not from Sweden, it will probably, I imagine, seem strange to hear someone say that how strange to have soldiers deployed, because most countries in the world do so once in a while. Perhaps not in every generation, but most people in the world have a parent or a grandparent or some relative with experience from war. But Swedes do not. Almost none of us. So now, today, when we received the images, the video, seeing our boys being deployed to Latvia, our young men, it had this fictitious feel to it. When a Swede reads about war in school, it is something happening somewhere else. So from a young age, and as we reach adulthood, we just sort of take for granted that war is not something Swedes do, not personally. We are not soldiers personally, at least not on a large scale. So emotionally, Swedes are unprepared for what is now happening. Not necessarily dealing with the specific strategies and tactics of war, not that, but emotionally identifying ourselves as a people at war. It still feels surreal to most Swedes. Like somewhat of an sort of dissociative feeling, because we have taken for granted for all our lives that it doesn't happen to us. But now, in just 4 years, it is happening to us. So, the Polaroid for today's episode is universal skill time. And universal skill time is about that some things we do in one and the same way for the longest time. Like Sweden, for the longest time we thought of ourselves as a peace-loving people. And now, suddenly, in just 4 years, we no longer do. And that brings us to our second part of today's episode, namely that now Swedes are supposed to change their identities from being a peace-loving people to being a people willing or ready to go to war on a large scale. And having had one identity for most of our lives, it's not that simple to just flick a switch and or flip a switch, maybe you say, and just become someone else. It's not that simple. And could be that we live in times right now. Could be that you, the listener, are sitting in another country. And that your people or your country has been thinking of themselves, that you have been thinking about yourselves to be in one way, in one specific way. But now being expected to change drastically how you think about yourself. Could be that there are patterns and trends going on right now putting such pressure on peoples, pushing them to change how they think about themselves as a people. Universal skill time is about that when we do something in one way, day after day, after day after day, for the longest time, seemingly nothing done every day can become indeed something. And Swedes, for the moment, being our example in today's episode, have day after day built something, built this sort of identity of being a peace-loving people. And today, all of a sudden, Swedish soldiers are deployed abroad. And I am certain that most Swedes right now try their utmost to adjust to this new identity, to adjust to being prepared and willing and ready for duty, being ready for war personally, with our own bodies as sort of at stake. But just because Swedes try their best right now does not mean that all those years of being peace-loving, or thinking of oneself at least as being peace-loving, that does not go away. It's still there. Beneath a very shallow veneer of readiness, of willingness to go to war, there is a deep core of thinking the exact opposite. And universal skill time is about this, that we might put on veneers, thin veneers, trying to be one way. But if we have done in the opposite way for the longest time, then that will influence the outcome. People don't just change overnight. They might change for a limited time, yes, but not long term. They just don't. So I guess we will see now how both our example of the day, Swedish soldiers being deployed, and Swedes in general trying to be ready for war, even though it feels surreal to most Swedes if they are honest with themselves. It remains to be seen how this will play out, how much you can mobilize a people not ready to be mobilized at all. It remains to be seen and what the outcome will be. Probably there will be a lot of misunderstandings. Probably there will be unrealistic goals being set on every level of society. Sweden feels very confused right now. And I bet that's true for many countries in our Western world right now. And it is certainly true for Sweden. A lot of brave faces among people, but underneath a lot of confusion. Everybody trying their best, but it's hard. It's hard trying to cover up years and years of doing one way, only to be expected to do the opposite all of a sudden. The last 4 years are just 4 years. And the 200 years before are 200 years. There's the difference. That's it for today. Thank you.